You've spoken honestly about the possibility of war between U.S. and China in the long term, if no diplomatic solution is found. For example, on the question of Taiwan and one China policy.
Right.
How do we avoid the trajectory where these two superpowers clash?
Well, it's worth reading that book on the difficult to pronounce Thucydides trap, I believe it's called. I love war history. I like inside out and backwards. There's hardly a battle I haven't read about. And trying to figure out like what really was the cause of victory in any particular case, as opposed to what one side or another claimed was the reason.
Both the victory and what sparked the war and
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah. So that Athens and Sparta is a classic case. The thing about the Greeks is they really wrote down a lot of stuff. They loved writing. There are lots of interesting things that happened in many parts of the world, but people just didn't write down. So we don't know what happened, or they didn't really write in detail. They just would say like, we had a battle and we won. And like, well, what? Can you add a bit more? The Greeks, they really wrote a lot. They were very articulate they just love writing. So, and we have a bunch of that writing that's preserved. So we know what led up to the Peloponnesian War between the Spartan and Athenian alliance. And we know that they saw it coming. I mean, the Spartans didn't write. They also weren't very verbose by their nature, but they did write, but they weren't very verbose. They were terse. But the Athenians and the other Greeks wrote a lot, and they were like, and Sparta was really kind of like the leader of Greece. But Athens grew stronger and stronger with each passing year, and everyone's like, well, that's inevitable that there's going to be a clash between Athens and Sparta. Well, how do we avoid that? And they saw it coming and they still could not avoid it. So, at some point, if one group, one civilization or country or whatever, exceeds another, sort of like if, the United States has been the biggest kid on the block since I think around 1890 from an economic standpoint. So the United States has been the most powerful economic engine in the world longer than anyone's been alive. And the foundation of war is economics. So now we have a situation in the case of China where the economy is likely to be 2, perhaps 3 times larger than that of the U.S. So imagine you're the biggest kid on the block for as long as anyone can remember, and suddenly a kid comes along who's twice your size.
So we see it coming.
Yeah.
How is it possible to stop? Is there let me throw something out there, just intermixing of cultures, understanding. There does seem to be a giant cultural gap in understanding of each other. And you're an interesting case study because you are an American, obviously. You've done a lot of incredible manufacture here in the United States, but you also work with China.
I've spent a lot of time in China and met with the leadership many times.
Maybe a good question to ask is, what are some things about China that people don't understand, positive, just in the culture? What's some interesting things that you've learned about the Chinese? Well,
the sheer number of really smart, hardworking people in China is incredible. There are really, if you say like how many smart, hardworking people are there in China, there's far more of them there than there are here, I think, in my opinion. And they've got a lot of energy. So, I mean, the architecture in China that's in recent years is far more impressive than the U.S. I mean, the train stations, the buildings, the high-speed rail, everything. It's really far more impressive than what we have in the U.S. I mean, I recommend somebody just go to Shanghai and Beijing, look at the buildings, and go to, take the train from Beijing to Xi'an, where you have the terracotta warriors. China's got an incredible history, very long history. And, I think arguably in terms of the use of language from a written standpoint, sort of one of the oldest, perhaps the oldest written language. And then China, people did write things down. So now China historically has always been, with rare exception, been internally focused. They have not been acquisitive. They've fought each other. There have been many civil wars. In the Three Kingdoms War, I believe they lost about 70% of their population. So they've had brutal internal wars, like civil wars that make the U.S. Civil War look small by comparison. So I think it's important to appreciate that China is not monolithic. Mm-hmm. We sort of think of like China as this sort of one entity of one mind, and this is definitely not the case. From what I've seen, and I think most people who understand China would agree, that people in China think about China 10 times more than they think about anything outside of China. So it's like 90% of their consideration is, is internal.
Well, isn't that a really positive thing when you're talking about the collaboration and a future peace between superpowers? When you're inward facing, which is like focusing on improving yourself versus focusing on, quote unquote, improving others through military might.
The good news, the history of China suggests that China is not acquisitive, meaning they're not going to go out and invade a whole bunch of countries. Now, they do feel very strongly, so that's good. I mean, because a lot of very powerful countries have been acquisitive. Mm-hmm. The U.S. is also one of the rare cases that has not been acquisitive. Like after World War II, the U.S. could have basically taken over the world and any country. Like we got nukes, nobody else got nukes. We don't even have to lose soldiers. Which country do you want? Mm-hmm. And the United States could have taken over everything. At will, and it didn't. And the United States actually helped rebuild countries. So it helped rebuild Europe. It helped rebuild Japan. This is very unusual behavior, almost unprecedented. The U.S. did conspicuous acts of kindness, like the Berlin airlift. And I think, it's always like, well, America's done bad things. Well, of course, America's done bad things, but one needs to look at the whole track record. And just generally, one sort of test would be, how do you treat your prisoners of war? Mm-hmm. Or let's say, no offense to the Russians, but let's say you're in Germany. It's 1945. You got the Russian army coming on one side, and you got the French, British, and American armies coming on the other side. Who would you like to surrender to? Like, no country is like morally perfect, but I recommend being a POW with the Americans. That would be my choice very strongly.
In the full menu of POW.
Very much so. And in fact, Wernher von Braun took, a smart guy, was like, we've got to be captured by the Americans. Yeah. And in fact, the SS was under orders to execute von Braun and all of the German rocket engineers. And they narrowly escaped their SS. They said they were going out for a walk in the woods. They left in the middle of winter with no coats. And then ran and with no food, no coats, no water. And just ran like hell, and ran west. And by sheer luck, I think his brother found like a bicycle or something, and then just cycled west as fast as he could and found a U.S. patrol. So anyway, that's one way you can tell morality is where do you want to be a POW? It's not fun anywhere, but some places are much worse than others. So anyway, so I think America has been, while far from perfect, generally a benevolent force. And we should always be self-critical and we try to be better. But anyone with half a brain knows that. So I think there are, in this way, China and the United States are similar. Neither country has been acquisitive. in a significant way. So that's like a shared principle, I guess. Now China does feel very strongly about Taiwan. They've been very clear about that for a long time. From their standpoint, it would be like one of the states is not there like Hawaii or something like that, but more significant than Hawaii. And Hawaii is pretty significant for us. So they view it as really that there's a fundamental part of China, the island of Formosa, now Taiwan, that is not part of China but should be. And the only reason that it hasn't been is because of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
And as their economic power grows and as their military power grows, the thing that they're clearly saying is their interest will, clearly be materialized.
Yes. China has been very clear that they will incorporate Taiwan peacefully or militarily, but that they will incorporate it from their standpoint is 100% likely.
Something you said about conspicuous acts of kindness. As a geopolitical policy, it almost seems naive, but I'd venture to say that this is probably the path forward, how you avoid most wars. Just as you say it, it sounds naive, but it's kind of brilliant. If you believe in the goodness of underlying most of human nature, it just seems like conspicuous acts of kindness can reverberate through the populace of the countries involved. And de-escalate.
Absolutely. So, after World War I, they made a big mistake. They basically tried to lump all the blame on Germany, and saddled Germany with impossible reparations. Really there was quite a bit of blame to go around for World War I, but they try to put it all on Germany, that laid the seeds for World War II. So it's a lot of people, well, not just Hitler, a lot of people felt wronged, and they wanted vengeance, and they got it.
People don't forget.
Yeah. You kill somebody's father, mother, son, daughter, they're not going to forget it. They will want vengeance. So after World War II, they're like, well, the Treaty of Versailles was a huge mistake in World War I. And so this time, instead of crushing the losers, we're actually going to help them with the Marshall Plan, and we're going to help rebuild Germany. We're going to help rebuild Austria and the other, Italy and whatnot. So and that was the right move.
It does feel like there's a profound truth to conspicuous acts of kindness being an antidote to this.
Something must stop the cycle of reciprocal violence. Something must stop it, or it will, it'll never stop. Just eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, limb for a limb, life for a life, forever and ever.